I woke up rich, gorgeous, and in a fairy tale mansion. Then, boom! A vampire kicked down my door and tried to kill me. Found you, little traitor. Me, sir, I think you have the wrong girl. Ah, why are you kidnapping me? Him, smirking, effortlessly carrying me like a sack of potatoes. Oh, darling. You killed me once. It's only fair that I return the favor. Cue my internal breakdown. You know that awkward moment when a vampire king kidnaps you, calls you his murderer, and you're just like, "Sir, I can explain?" Yeah, me neither. And then, his fangs graze my neck as he whispers, "You killed me once, little hunter. Now it's my turn to make you pay." Where's a priest when you need one? Hey you. Welcome to AUDIOBOOks, where love and logic are officially divorced, and chaos has full custody. Chaos begins. Chapter 1. I woke up in silk sheets, in a bed so large I could roll over 5 times and still not fall off. The room smelled like lavender and wealth. That should have been my first clue that something was off. Because last I checked, I was, well, not rich. I sat up, blinking in confusion, and caught my reflection in the massive gilded mirror across the room. My skin was pale, too pale. My dark hair cascaded over my shoulders in perfect waves. And my eyes. Wait, were they always this strikingly silver? My eyebrows scrunched together. What in the ever-loving hell? I muttered. My voice was softer, more refined. Not the tired, overworked student voice I remembered. This was a rich girl's voice. A soft knock on the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Come in," I called hesitantly. The door swung open, and in walked Lilia, my best friend. Or at least, she felt like my best friend. The knowledge was just there, sitting in my brain like it had always been true. She was effortlessly beautiful, with golden hair in an elaborate updo, wearing an elegant lace gown. But my gaze immediately caught something else. Her skin. Pale. Almost luminescent. And when she smiled, her teeth were a little too sharp. I knew instinctively what she was. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said, setting down a steaming cup of tea on my nightstand. "I feel like I did," I admitted. "Lilia, why do I feel like I've been hit by an identity crisis train?" She tilted her head, amusement flickering in her deep red eyes. "Yep, definitely a vampire." "Well, I did tell you not to drink so much at the Duke's gala last night," she teased. Gala. My brain tried to catch up, but it was like wading through syrup. She sighed dramatically. "You really don't remember, do you? You're Seraphine d'Aragon, only daughter of the esteemed d'Aragon family, heiress to a vast fortune. And yes, I am a vampire. Don't look so surprised, darling." I blinked at her, then at the tea. "Did you put blood in this?" I blurted. She rolled her eyes. As if. "It's chamomile. Drink it before you faint from shock." Before I could ask more questions, she handed me a luxurious robe and practically dragged me out of bed. "Come on, we're going to be late." "Late for what?" I asked warily. "The noble gathering. Don't worry, you'll love it." Spoiler. I did not love it. The grand hall was suffocatingly elegant, filled with people who looked like they belonged in a historical drama. Chandeliers sparkled above us, and I tried not to gawk like an idiot. Lilia guided me through the crowd like she did this in her sleep. Then I felt it. A shiver down my spine. Then, something shifted in the air. A shiver ran down my spine. I was being watched. And when I turned, my breath hitched. There, across the room, stood a man with piercing dark eyes, dressed in deep black, exuding power and danger in equal measure. His lips curled into a smirk, and my blood ran cold. "Found you, little traitor." "Huh? Who are you?" I murmured. Before I could react, Lilia suddenly appeared beside me, gripping my wrist a little too tightly. "Seraphine," she whispered urgently. "We need to go. Now." I frowned, confusion clouding my mind. "Why? What's wrong? Who is that?" Lilia's usually calm face had an edge of tension. That man. He's bad news. Just trust me. Don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, do not talk to him. Too late. Lucien, as if sensing my curiosity, took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The glint in his eyes was sharp, almost amused, like he enjoyed watching me squirm. Leaving so soon? His voice was smooth as silk, but the undercurrent of danger was impossible to miss. That's a shame. We have so much to catch up on. Lilia tugged me harder, her grip like iron. Seraphine, move. Now. My feet, however, seemed rooted to the ground. Because something about this man, this stranger, felt oddly familiar. Chapter 2. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Lucien's eyes bore into mine like they could pull secrets straight from my soul. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the entire ballroom could hear it. Who was he? And why did the word traitor feel like a noose tightening around my neck? Lilia's grip on my wrist was iron. Seraphine, she hissed, voice urgent. We need to go. Now. Why? My voice came out barely above a whisper. My body felt frozen in place, locked in some kind of invisible battle with Lucien's gaze. That man. Lilia inhaled sharply, choosing her words carefully. He's not someone you want to get involved with. Too late. Lucien took a single step forward, and my entire body went rigid. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator who already knew his prey had nowhere to run. The air around him felt thick with something I couldn't name. Power. Danger. Both. Leaving so soon? His voice was deep, smooth, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden in silk. That's a shame. We have so much to catch up on. My throat went dry. Catch up. Lilia yanked my arm so hard I almost tripped. Nope. Nope. We're leaving. Lucien tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in those dark eyes. You think you can walk away from me? A ripple of unease slithered down my spine. Because it wasn't a question. It was a fact. Lilia's nails dug into my wrist. Seraphine, she whispered fiercely. Listen to me. We cannot be near him. You don't understand. She was right. I didn't understand. But something deep inside me, a gut instinct maybe, was screaming that Lucien wasn't just some random nobleman. He knew me. Not just my name but something more. Something I didn't remember. Lucien took another step. I should have bolted, let Lilia drag me away. But my feet were rooted to the marble floor, trapped under the weight of an invisible memory I couldn't quite grasp. And then he said it. The name. Alicia. My breath hitched. My chest tightened, like something long buried was clawing its way to the surface. That name, it didn't belong to me. And yet, the second he said it, a sharp pain stabbed through my skull. My voice cracked. I don't know who that is. Lucien's smirk widened, but his eyes darkened. Oh, you will. Lilia didn't give me a chance to react. She pulled me so hard I stumbled, but this time, I let her drag me away. I didn't dare look back, even though I could feel his gaze burning into my spine. The moment we reached the carriage outside, Lilia practically shoved me inside. She slammed the door shut and turned to me with wild eyes. What the hell was that? I was still shaking. I should be asking you that. Who was he? Lilia groaned, burying her face in her hands. Lucien d'Auvergne. The name sent another shiver down my spine. And, Lilia said grimly, he's not just some nobleman. He's the king of vampires. I choked on air. Excuse me. Lilia leaned forward, gripping my shoulders. Listen to me very carefully. Lucien d'Auvergne has been missing for centuries. People thought he was dead. And now, out of nowhere, he shows up and calls you Alicia. I swallowed hard. So. Lilia's expression turned deadly serious. So, Alicia was the name of the woman who betrayed him. The world tilted. That's That's not possible. She exhaled, glancing out the carriage window like she was expecting him to materialize out of thin air. He's dangerous, Seraphine. And if he thinks you're her. I finished the sentence for her. Then I'm in deep trouble. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the way Lucien looked at me, the way his voice wrapped around my name. No, Alicia's name, like a whisper from the past. The way something deep inside me had stirred, like an echo of something I had long forgotten. I turned in my massive bed, staring at the ceiling. It's just a coincidence, I muttered to myself. I am not some ancient vampire traitor. A rustling sound near my window made my entire body seize up. Slowly, I turned my head. There, standing just beyond the glass, was Lucien. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest. He stood in the moonlight, one hand resting casually against the frame, watching me with that same unreadable expression. You think I'll let you go? His voice was barely more than a whisper, but I heard it as clearly as if he were right next to me. Cute. I scrambled out of bed, backing up until I hit the far wall. How did you? Lucien just smiled. We have unfinished business, little traitor. A knock sounded at my door. Seraphine. Lilia's voice. Are you awake? I tore my gaze away for half a second, just a half second, but when I looked back, he was gone. Vanished. Like a ghost. Lilia stared at me, unimpressed, as I shoved breakfast into my mouth the next morning. You look like you saw death itself last night. I swallowed my toast with difficulty. Not death. But close. Lilia sighed. He was at your window, wasn't he? I gawked at her. How do you know that? She rolled her eyes. Because he's obsessed with you. I told you. She sipped her tea like this was normal. I dropped my head onto the table. Lilia. Bestie. My beloved. Fix this. She just smiled. Oh no. This is your mess. Later that evening, I was walking through the estate gardens, trying to clear my head. The air was cool, scented with roses and something else I couldn't place. Then, I felt it again. That shiver. I turned slowly, and there he was. Standing beneath the lantern light, arms crossed, watching me like I was the only thing in the world worth looking at. Lucien smiled. Alicia. I clenched my jaw. My name is Seraphine. He tilted his head. Are you sure? I opened my mouth to snap at him, but he vanished. I barely had time to gasp before he reappeared right behind me, his breath ghosting against my ear. You don't remember me, he murmured. But I remember everything. My entire body locked up. I should have run. Screamed. Done something. But instead, I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. Then tell me, I whispered. Tell me what I don't remember. Lucien's smirk softened. Oh, sweetheart. That's the fun part. I had no idea what he meant. But I was about to find out. Chapter 3. I barely had time to process the fact that Lucien, the so-called vampire king, was standing inches away from me when chaos erupted. One moment, the ballroom was filled with polite laughter, glasses clinking, and the soft hum of an orchestra. The next, it was anarchy. A chilling scream tore through the air, followed by the sound of shattering glass. A man in a noble's attire lunged forward, except his face twisted, his fangs bared. His eyes glowed red as he let out a feral snarl. And he was coming straight for me. Lilia shoved me back just in time as the vampire's claws slashed through the space where I had just been standing. My breath hitched as my back collided with a marble pillar. Panic surged through me. Why was this happening? Weren't vampires supposed to be civilized? The peace between humans, nobles, and vampires had been stable for years. Traitor, the vampire snarled. You murdered our king. My mind blanked. What? I had done a lot of things in my life, mostly struggling to pass exams and trying not to trip over my own feet in public, but murdering a vampire king was definitely not on my resume. Lilia reacted faster than I did. She swung her arm, and in a blur of motion, her nails extended into razor-sharp claws, slashing across the attacker's face. He let out a guttural howl and stumbled back, blood dripping onto the marble floor. My pulse pounded. Lilia, what the hell is going on? More figures emerged from the shadows, fangs flashing, their eyes locked onto me like predators circling prey. A woman in a deep crimson dress pointed an accusatory finger at me. "You think you can hide in this world, pretending to be one of us?" she hissed. "You don't deserve to exist." Something inside me coiled in fear. The pure venom in her voice sent a chill down my spine. Then, another vampire lunged, a silver blade in his hand. Time slowed as I saw the weapon gleaming in the candlelight, aimed straight at my chest. I braced myself for impact. But it never came. A sickening crunch echoed through the hall. The attacker's body was yanked backward so fast it was a blur, and the next thing I saw was Lucien, gripping the man by the throat with terrifying ease. His fingers tightened, and with a sharp twist, snap, the vampire went limp, his body hitting the floor in a crumpled heap. The other nobles gasped, stepping back as the sheer dominance of Lucien's presence filled the space. He turned to the others, his eyes glowing an eerie gold. "She dies when I say so. Not before." The remaining vampires hesitated. Some looked ready to argue, but none dared to move under the weight of his stare. Lucien exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing at his sides as if restraining himself from further violence. Then, before I could react, his arms were around me. 1 second, I was standing there, my legs locked in fear. The next, my feet weren't even on the ground anymore. He picked me up as if I weighed nothing and turned toward the massive doors of the ballroom. "Did you just kidnap me?" I shrieked, struggling in his hold. Lucien let out a low chuckle. "Sweetheart, I just saved your life. A thank you would be nice." "Put me down, you overgrown bat." "No." I flailed harder, kicking my legs, but he held me effortlessly. Lilia, instead of helping, stood off to the side, smirking with her arms crossed. "Oh girl, you're in danger," she sang under her breath. Lucien carried me through the doors and into the dimly lit corridors. The moment we were alone, his grip tightened, and he leaned down, his breath brushing against my ear. "Do you really not remember me, Alicia?" The name sent a jolt through my spine. My protests stilled, my breath caught in my throat. That name. Why did it sound so familiar? Lucien watched my reaction closely, his expression unreadable. For the first time, there was no amusement in his gaze, only something deeper, something dangerously close to longing. "I don't know who you are," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Lucien studied my face, as if searching for something. His fingers brushed against my wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You will." Then, with inhuman speed, he carried me away into the night. The world blurred around me. Wind howled past my ears, but I barely registered it over the pounding of my heart. My arms were pinned against his chest, and his grip was unyielding yet careful, as if I was something precious. Which was ironic, considering I had no idea who he was or why he seemed so obsessed with me. Then, suddenly, we stopped. The moment my feet touched the ground, I stumbled. The world spun. I was in a completely different part of the noble district, near the outskirts of the grand estates. The scent of old parchment, firewood, and faint traces of blood filled the air. I barely had time to process where we were before a new presence stormed toward us. Seraphine. A tall figure dropped to one knee before me. His golden armor gleamed under the moonlight, his obsidian black cape billowing in the cold wind. Rowan. The chief commander of the noble guard, my personal protector. I had never seen him kneel before anyone. "My lady, I beg your forgiveness. I failed you." His head was bowed, his voice thick with regret. "I should have been there sooner. You're too late." Lucien's voice was pure steel, unimpressed and laced with amusement. What exactly were you guarding, Commander? Rowan's head snapped up, dark green eyes burning with fury. I was hunting down those who dared lay a hand on her. His gaze flickered to me, softening just a fraction. I will personally execute those responsible. I blinked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. Wait, what? Lucian chuckled, the sound dark and knowing. Oh, little Alicia. Seraphine, I corrected sharply, my mind still fogged with confusion but clear enough to know that wasn't my name. Lucian only smirked. They thought you murdered their king. Rowan's expression darkened. A baseless claim. The king of the Night Court was slain centuries ago. This foolish faction still believes in myths. Lucian's smirk grew, as if enjoying an inside joke only he understood. Ah yes. A myth. My stomach twisted. So, people are trying to kill me over some ancient vampire politics? Rowan turned to me, his voice low with urgency. Not people. Vampires. Fanatics who still believe you are to blame. I was about to demand more details when the air around us shifted. Then they came. Dark figures emerged from the rooftops, their eyes gleaming with malice. The scent of old blood saturated the air, and I knew, without a doubt, that we weren't alone. Rowan stepped in front of me, his sword unsheathed in an instant. Stand down, he commanded. They did not. A vampire lunged at me, too fast for my human eyes to fully register. 1 second he was above me, the next. Crack. Lucian moved faster than thought. One hand snapped the vampire's neck with brutal ease, his expression unreadable as the body crumpled to the ground. She dies when I say so, didn't I? Not before. Silence. The remaining vampires hesitated, their bloodlust wavering at the sheer authority in his voice. My heart slammed against my ribs. Who was this man? What power did he hold that even other vampires feared him? Lucian exhaled, almost lazily. I grow tired of these interruptions. In a blink, he swept me into his arms again. What are you doing? I screamed, struggling against his grip. Sweetheart, Lucian murmured smoothly. Rowan roared, surging forward with his sword raised. Unhand her, monster. Lucian chuckled, easily dodging the attack as if it were child's play. You'll have to do better than that, Commander. Then, just as suddenly as before, we vanished into the night. Chapter 4. I woke up feeling like death. Everything ached. My head, my limbs, even my teeth for some reason. My skin burned as if I had been dipped in boiling water and then dragged across gravel. I barely had the strength to lift my head from the pillow, but the moment I opened my eyes, I saw 2 figures hovering over me. My parents. My mother was perched on the edge of my bed, eyes filled with worry. My father, however, was pacing like a man preparing to go to war. His expression was a mix of concern and frustration, and when he finally turned to look at me, his voice was sharp. Seraphine. What happened? I swallowed, throat dry. How exactly was I supposed to explain that I was attacked by vampires, remembered my past life, and was now being actively hunted by an entire supernatural species? I wasn't feeling well. Must have fainted. My father frowned. And you expect me to believe that? Of course not. My father was one of the most observant men I knew. I'd have a better chance of convincing him the sky was purple. Seraphine, you had a high fever when you were brought home, my mother interjected gently. Lilia and that man carried you inside. You were shaking. You were muttering in your sleep. It was like you were reliving something. What happened out there? I hesitated. Images of Lucian flashed in my mind. The way he looked at me with those piercing eyes, filled with something I couldn't yet name. The way his touch burned, like he was trying to remind me of something my body had long forgotten. Then there were the vampires who had tried to kill me. The ones who thought I had murdered their king. Which, technically, I had. Just 400 years ago. I let out a slow breath. I can't talk about it right now. My father scowled, but my mother put a hand on his arm, stopping him from pressing further. Fine, he said, exhaling sharply. But this isn't over. He turned on his heel and stormed out. My mother lingered for a moment, her fingers brushing against my forehead before she sighed and followed him. That left me alone. Or so I thought. Because the moment the door shut, I turned over, and came face to face with Lilia. My best friend. My supposed ride or die. The girl who had been keeping a gigantic secret from me. A wave of anger crashed over me, and I shot up in bed, nearly knocking heads with her. You knew I was a vampire hunter. I exploded, my voice echoing off the walls. Lilia flinched. Surprise. I wanted to scream. Are you actually joking right now? I gaped at her. You knew I was Alicia? You knew that I was the greatest vampire hunter of all time? Lilia supplied. Yes. I clenched my fists. And you didn't think to mention it. Lilia gave me a sheepish smile. I was going to. Eventually. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. You mean you were going to tell me after I got skewered in an alley by an angry vampire? Well, technically, they didn't skewer you. I wanted to throttle her. Before I could, however, a low chuckle filled the room. I froze. Slowly, I turned to see a man lounging against the doorway, arms crossed, a devilish grin plastered across his face. He had tousled dark brown hair, sharp green eyes, and an amused glint that immediately made me want to throw something at him. You killed him, and now you're mad that he's mad? I blinked. Who the hell are you? The man pressed a hand to his chest, mock offended. Finn, dear. Lucian's oldest friend. Also the guy who carried your unconscious body home while Lilia had a breakdown. Lovely to meet you. I stared at him. Then at Lilia. Then back at him. You carried me? Finn waggled his brows. Don't worry. I didn't look much. I was going to strangle him. I'm the victim here. I exploded, throwing my hands in the air. Everyone keeps talking about what I did centuries ago, but what about me right now? I woke up rich, I woke up pretty, and now I find out I have an entire species trying to kill me. Lilia cleared her throat. Technically, not the entire species. Just the ones that haven't gotten over the whole "you stabbed their king" thing. I groaned, sinking back onto the bed. Then my mother busted in, looked utterly lost. My father was confused, and Finn was clearly enjoying the entire spectacle. Meanwhile, I was struggling not to pass out from stress. So let me get this straight, I muttered. 400 years ago, I was Alicia, some badass vampire hunter. I seduced Lucian, made him fall in love with me, and then I stabbed him. Lilia nodded. In the heart. I winced. Oof. Finn whistled lowly. Yeah, sweetheart. You kinda did him dirty. I shot him a glare. Why are you even here? Finn shrugged. Lucian wanted me to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't, I don't know, jump off a cliff or something now that you remember. Oh great, I muttered. I have a babysitter. Lilia stepped forward, a rare look of genuine concern on her face. Seraphine. Listen. You're in danger. The vampires that attacked you the other night? They think you killed their king. They don't know he's still alive. My blood ran cold. So they want revenge. Lilia nodded grimly. Exactly. I pressed my fingers to my temples. And Lucian? Finn grinned. Oh, he's obsessed with you. My heart stuttered. What? He spent centuries looking for you, Finn said lazily, inspecting his nails. Poor guy never got closure. Imagine getting stabbed by the love of your life and then waking up alone? Messed him up real bad. I swallowed hard. But I'm not her. I mean, I am, but I don't remember everything. I don't feel like her. Finn's smirk softened just a little. Yeah. Try telling that to him. A shiver ran down my spine. Lilia placed a gentle hand on my arm. We need to figure out what to do, Seraphine. You can't hide from him forever. I exhaled shakily. Lucien remembered everything. And soon I would too. And when that happened, I had no idea what I'd become. Chapter 5. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. My breath hitched. It was happening again. Another flashback. At first, it was blurry, like trying to recall a dream after waking up, but then it hit me like a runaway train. I saw him, Lucien, younger, more vulnerable. His deep red eyes staring into mine, filled with an emotion I had ignored, brushed aside, stomped on. I had been smiling at him. No, not smiling. Smirking. My past self, Alicia, had run her fingers through his hair, trailing soft circles on the back of his neck. "Do you trust me?" she had whispered. Lucien, the fool, had nodded, utterly devoted. I had kissed him, slow and lingering. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I drove a dagger straight into his chest. And laughed. The memory cut off like a blade to the throat. I staggered back, nearly falling over as my stomach lurched. My head pounded with the weight of realization. My hands trembled as I looked up at Lilia, who was watching me with an expression that could only be described as yikes. "Oh," I croaked. My throat felt dry. "Oh. Yeah, girl," Lilia confirmed, crossing her arms. "You were toxic." I gripped my head, pacing in frantic circles. I gaslit a vampire king. Yup. I led him into an ambush. Sure did. I stabbed him while laughing. Lilia exhaled slowly. Aha. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or maybe throw up. Instead, I turned sharply toward her. "And you knew." Lilia had the audacity to look sheepish. "Well, we had suspicions. Your weird obsession with wooden stakes? Your unnatural ability to dodge attacks? The fact that when a vampire tried to bite you last year, their fangs snapped." I gawked. "Wait, what?" "We didn't want to say anything until we were sure," she continued, waving a hand. "Then we found some ancient records about Alicia and how she disappeared 400 years ago. And let's just say, you fit the profile a little too well." I sat down abruptly. So let me get this straight. I was a vampire hunter. But not just any vampire hunter. The best. I seduced Lucien, made him fall for me, and then stabbed him. Lilia nodded. "Pretty much. And he actually loved me?" She made an oof face. "Looks like it." I groaned, pressing the heels of my palms into my eyes. "No wonder he wants me dead." "Hey!" Lilia hesitated, glancing over my shoulder. "About that." A chill ran down my spine before I even turned around. There, leaning against the doorway, was Lucien. His lips were curled into a smirk, and his crimson eyes held an amusement that made my stomach twist into knots. "Remembering, are we?" I swallowed. "Yes." "No, and I'm sorry. Please don't kill me." Lucien tilted his head, looking me over as if I were a particularly interesting puzzle piece. "Kill you?" His voice was velvet, laced with dark amusement. "Oh, sweetheart. I have much better plans for you." My stomach dropped to my feet. Lilia took a slow step back, holding her hands up in surrender. "Welp. That's my cue to leave. Good luck, bestie." And just like that, she bolted. "Traitor." I turned my gaze back to Lucien, forcing a weak laugh. "So, when you say, better plans, you mean, like, forgiveness? Letting bygones be bygones? Water under the bridge?" Lucien's smirk widened. "No, darling." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I mean retribution." I resisted the urge to run. Retribution. His fingers grazed my chin, tilting it up so I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You played me for a fool once, Seraphine. You made me love you, only to tear my heart out. Literally." His grip tightened slightly. Now it's my turn. I could barely breathe. Why your turn? Lucien leaned in, his lips a whisper away from my ear. You will fall for me, he murmured, his voice sending shivers down my spine. And when you do, I will have you at my mercy. My heart slammed against my ribs. That's not fair. He pulled back, chuckling. Oh, sweetheart. His fingers traced down my jaw before he finally stepped away, his presence still lingering like a phantom. Revenge never is. And then, just like that, he was gone. I sat frozen for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway where Lucien had stood. My thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind of panic, disbelief, and, most horrifying of all, something dangerously close to anticipation. Oh no. I think I gaslit, gatekept, and girl-bossed a vampire king. And now he's about to do the same to me. Chapter 6. The first time I got kidnapped, it was by vampires who wanted me dead. The second time, it was by a vampire who wanted me alive, for reasons I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Lucien had a grip on my wrist like a steel vice, leading me through the halls of his castle as if I was some unruly pet he had to drag home. And I had tried everything. Pulling, yanking, digging my heels into the floor, even attempting to bite his arm, but he barely flinched. Would you stop struggling? He sighed, sounding more annoyed than anything else. Would you stop kidnapping me? I shot back. He ignored me and continued walking like this was a casual stroll in the park. The castle was nothing like I expected. Dark stone walls, high ceilings, elegant chandeliers. It was a Gothic dream, but one that felt like a very luxurious prison. Where the hell are we? I demanded. Home, he said smoothly, and that single word sent a shiver down my spine. Correction, you're home, I snapped. I have a perfectly good home. Thank you very much. Take me back. He finally stopped walking, turning to face me with that infuriating smirk. Oh, sweetheart. Do you really think I went through all this trouble just to let you walk away? I scowled, but before I could yell at him, a familiar voice cut through the air. 10 gold says she tries to bite him again, Finn drawled lazily. I whipped my head around and saw him leaning against the wall, arms crossed, amusement practically dripping off him. He looked like he was having the time of his life. I'll bet 20 she actually kisses him first, a vampire guard muttered. My jaw dropped. Excuse me. Finn just grinned. Oh, don't mind us, princess. We're just placing bets on how long it takes before Stockholm Syndrome kicks in. I'm going to kill you, I seethed. Lucien chuckled, completely unbothered. Now. Let's not make promises you can't keep. I was fuming. This was a joke to them. My life was a joke to them. I tried to yank my hand free again, but Lucien caught my other wrist in a single swift motion, trapping me completely. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur. Try to run, and I'll catch you midair. Throw something at me, I'll dodge without looking. Call me a creepy, obsessive lunatic. Well, I might just enjoy that one. My eyes widened. You're insane. He smirked. You're catching on. I inhaled sharply, my pulse racing. This was bad. Very, very bad. Then, because the universe hated me, another voice chimed in. Lucien, darling, you should let her go. A woman stepped into view, graceful as a swan, dressed in a flowing emerald gown that hugged her curves perfectly. She was the picture of elegance and menace. Her sharp icy blue eyes locked onto me, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Who the hell is this? I asked immediately. Oh, sweetheart, she said in a tone so condescending it made my blood boil. I'm the one who's been by Lucien's side for centuries. Oh, I hated her. I turned to Lucien. Let me guess. You're White Moonlight. The one who stayed while I ghosted you for 400 years. Lucien's lips twitched like he was trying not to laugh. I prefer the term devoted companion, she corrected. I fake gasped. Oh my god, you're a green tea bitch. Her expression darkened, but Lucien's smirk only grew. Jealous? He asked smoothly. I scoffed. Of what? Your emotional support snake. Finn actually wheezed. The woman's gaze turned deadly, but before she could respond, Lucian tightened his grip on my waist and lifted me off my feet as if I weighed nothing. Put me down, you overgrown bat. I screeched. Not a chance, sweetheart. He carried me effortlessly through the halls, ignoring my flailing. You and I have unfinished business. I had a feeling I was kidnapped. Again. Fantastic, I muttered. Maybe I should get a punch card. 5 kidnappings, and the next one is free. A deep, amused voice came from the shadows. You're awake. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Lucian was standing near the fireplace, leaning casually against the mantel like he hadn't just forcibly dragged me to his villainous lair. His black shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing just enough of his annoyingly perfect skin to make me irrationally angry. You, I spat. You absolute, creepy, obsessive lunatic. Lucian smirked. I like it when you talk dirty to me. I threw the nearest object at him. A book. Without even looking, he tilted his head, and the book whizzed past him, crashing against the stone wall with a loud thud. He didn't even flinch. Cute, he said. I wanted to scream. Taking a deep breath, I narrowed my eyes. Let me go. Lucian's smirk deepened. No. Let me go. Still no. I lunged for the door. I didn't even make it 2 steps before I was airborne. 1 second, I was running. The next, I was in the air, spinning. Then I landed right back where I started, flat on my back on the bed, blinking up at the ceiling. Lucian, the absolute menace, had moved faster than I could blink. He was now sitting at the edge of the bed, looking very pleased with himself. Did you just catch me midair? I gasped. He leaned down, his voice silky. Sweetheart, if you want to be thrown onto the bed, you could just ask. My face ignited. You're insane. He chuckled. You say that like it's news. I wanted to die. Why is everyone like this? I screamed. Lucian simply tilted his head, watching me. Are you done with the dramatics? Not even close. I shot back, throwing another pillow at him. He caught it effortlessly and set it aside like he was dealing with a tantrum-throwing toddler. Then, as if this situation couldn't get any worse, the door swung open, and she walked in. The white moonlight. Or, as I like to call her, the green tea bitch. She strolled in like she owned the place. Which, to be fair, she might have. Her icy blue eyes flicked to me, and a slow, condescending smile spread across her lips. Oh, the infamous Alicia. She let out a soft, fake sigh. Or should I say, Seraphine. I clenched my jaw. Who are you? Celeste, she purred. Lucian's dear friend. Ah, so that's how we're playing this. She sauntered over to Lucian, placing a dainty hand on his shoulder, tilting her head in an utterly nauseating way. You should be careful, my love, she murmured. She has a history of betraying you after all. Lucian didn't react. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable. Celeste continued, her voice dripping with artificial concern. I just worry, you know? What if she's planning to hurt you again? After all, she did stab you in the heart last time. I narrowed my eyes. I don't know what your problem is, but I promise you. Lucian suddenly stood, cutting me off. He stepped toward me, gaze sharp. She's remembering. Silence fell over the room. My breath hitched. Because he was right. Flashes of memories were seeping into my mind, fragments of a past life I had barely started to piece together. My hands trembling. Lucian looking at me with something almost like love. The cold steel of a blade in my hands. His eyes wide with shock. Blood spilling across my fingers. And my laughter. I gasped, staggering back. Oh. Lilia had been right. I hadn't just killed Lucien. I had led him into an ambush. I had played with his heart, made him fall for me. And then I had laughed as I stabbed him. Celeste was still smirking. See? She was always heartless. My mouth went dry. Lucien. His eyes gleamed with something dark. Something unreadable. I knew something was wrong the second I saw Lilia's face. Scratch that. I knew something was wrong when she stormed into Lucien's castle like a woman on a mission. Her eyes filled with the kind of rage that made even the vampire guards step aside. She wasn't alone. My parents were right behind her, their expressions torn between fury and heartbreak. Seraphine, we need to talk, Lilia said, her voice sharp. Now. My stomach twisted. I don't like the way you just said that. She ignored me, her gaze flicking toward Lucien, who sat lazily in his chair, looking far too amused by the intrusion. You knew, didn't you? Lilia hissed at him. You knew this entire time and didn't say a damn word? Lucien stretched, completely unbothered. Oh, I knew. Knew what? I demanded, glancing between them. Someone want to let me in on what's happening? Because the tension in this room is giving me an anxiety attack. My mother was the one who finally stepped forward, eyes shining with unshed tears. Sweetheart, we should have told you sooner. We wanted to protect you. I blinked. Protect me from what? She hesitated. My father took her hand, squeezing it tightly before turning to me. The prophecy. Oh, fantastic. A prophecy. Because my life wasn't already dramatic enough. I crossed my arms. Let me guess. It's bad. Lilia inhaled sharply. It's a curse, Seraphine. A very, very bad one. I frowned, my heart pounding. Explain. Lilia turned to Lucien, glaring. He should be the one to tell you. Lucien finally rose from his seat, taking his sweet time walking toward me. His crimson eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. There are two paths, darling, he murmured, brushing a lock of hair from my face. You either accept me, become my mate, and live forever as a vampire. I swallowed hard. Or. Lucien smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Or you reject me, and you die in 3 months. My brain short-circuited. What? You heard me. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No. No, that's insane. I don't even remember my full past life. Why is the universe punishing me for something Alicia did? My mother let out a shaky breath. Because, sweetheart, you are Alicia. I froze. What? She exchanged a glance with my father before whispering. Your soul is bound to hers. You're not just her reincarnation. You are her. And the curse follows you. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. And let me guess, I said hoarsely. Lucien already knew this? Lucien tilted his head. Of course. I've been waiting for you to remember. I wanted to scream. This wasn't fair. I was finally getting used to the idea of being the most hated vampire hunter in history, and now I had to deal with a death sentence. You should have told me, I whispered. Lucien's gaze softened, just a fraction. Would it have changed anything? I opened my mouth, then shut it. Because, no, it wouldn't have. Finn, who had been unusually quiet this whole time, finally let out a low whistle. Well, that's dramatic as hell. So, what's the plan? My father exhaled heavily. That's why we're here. He turned to Lucien, eyes blazing. If we let her stay with you, she lives but loses her humanity. If we take her away, she dies. Lucien's expression darkened. You think you have a choice? A heavy silence fell over the room. My mother's lip trembled. She's our daughter. Lucien's jaw tightened. And she's my mate. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Lilia stepped in, hands on her hips. Okay, we're not just going to fight over her like she's a piece of furniture. Seraphine, what do you want? I flinched at the question. Because how the hell was I supposed to answer that? Die in 3 months, or give up everything I knew about myself and become Lucien's eternal blood-drinking mate? My breath came out shakily. I don't know. My mother suddenly let out a sob. There's something else. I turned to her, confused. What? She wiped her tears and looked at me with an expression so heavy it made my chest ache. I should have told you a long time ago, but I was afraid. Seraphine. I'm a vampire. I swear my soul left my body for a second. What? She nodded, gripping my father's hand tightly. I was born into a noble vampire family. But I fell in love with a human, your father. I turned to my dad, my eyes wild. You knew. He sighed. Of course I knew, sweetheart. We wanted a normal life for you. We thought, if we raised you away from the vampire world, you'd be safe. I let out a hysterical laugh. Yeah, that worked out great. Lilia pinched the bridge of her nose. So just to summarize, Seraphine is half vampire, her soul is cursed, and now she has to choose between an eternity with Lucien or dying in 3 months. Did I miss anything? Finn raised a hand. Yeah. How much do we want to bet she picks Lucien before the deadline? I whirled on him. I'm not picking Lucien. Lucien took my hand, his touch cold yet grounding. Don't worry, darling, he murmured, his lips curving into a smirk. You'll love me before then. My stomach flipped. No, I won't. Then I looked at his face. Crap. I was in so much trouble. Chapter 8. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. Admit it, little hunter. You want me. I slammed my hands against the dining table, rattling the expensive silverware. I want you to shut up. Lucien had the audacity to smirk, leaning back in his chair like he hadn't just spent the last 20 minutes tormenting me for fun. He was infuriating. Possessive. Smug. A literal vampire king with a god complex. And worst of all, my stupid heart raced every time he so much as looked at me. I was going to kill something. Preferably him. You're staring, darling, Lucien said lazily, swirling the wine in his glass. Except it wasn't wine, because, you know, vampire. Do you like what you see? I grabbed the nearest fork and threw it at his head. It didn't even faze him. He just caught it mid-air, twirling it between his fingers like I hadn't just tried to stab him in the eye. Across the table, Lilia sighed dreamily. They're in love. Finn snorted. She literally threw a fork at his head. Foreplay, Lilia countered, popping a grape into her mouth. Look at them. The tension is practically suffocating. I turned to glare at them. I will stab you next. Finn grinned. Kinky. Lucien chuckled, and I wanted to slap the sound right off his perfect, stupidly attractive face. Don't be shy, little hunter, he purred. If you want to touch me, all you have to do is ask. I grabbed a book off the shelf behind me and hurled it at him. He dodged without even looking. I hate him. The worst part. The absolute worst part. I remembered liking him. Not just tolerating him. Not just dealing with his existence. Liking him. Memories of my past life had been slowly creeping back, and unfortunately, they weren't all murderous. Some were disgustingly sweet. I remembered stolen glances, whispered promises, the way his lips had felt on mine before I... Nope. Not going there. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my expression into something neutral. Lucien, I said through gritted teeth, I will never ever want you. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. You say that now, he murmured. But I can hear your heartbeat. I froze. Lucien smirked. It races every time I touch you, every time I get close. You hate me, don't you, little hunter? He reached for my hand, brushing his fingers along my wrist, right where my pulse pounded like a war drum. Then why does your body betray you? My face burned. I yanked my hand back and stood so fast my chair nearly toppled over. Screw this. I need air. I stormed out of the room, ignoring Finn and Lilia's not-so-subtle snickering behind me. Lucien called after me, his voice dripping with amusement. You'll admit it soon, darling. You want me. I slammed the door behind me. I did not want him. Right. Outside, I took a deep breath, trying to will my heart into calming the hell down. The cool night air helped, but not by much. My mind was a mess. My emotions. Even worse. Lucien was everything I hated. Arrogant, controlling, the reason I was stuck in this whole curse nonsense to begin with. But the problem was, I wasn't just remembering the bad parts of my past life. I was remembering the parts where I had loved him, too. The way he had looked at me like I was his entire world. The way he had held me, whispered my name like a prayer. The way I had felt safe in his arms. I groaned, pressing the heels of my palms against my eyes. I am so screwed. Talking to yourself, sweetheart? I yelped, spinning around, only to find Lucien standing behind me, hands in his pockets, looking far too pleased with himself. Why are you like this? I snapped. Like what? He asked innocently. Irresistible. I turned to walk away, but in a blink, he was in front of me again, cutting off my escape. Damn vampire speed. His smirk faded slightly, his eyes searching mine. I meant what I said, he murmured. You want me. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way my body reacted to his nearness. I hate you, I whispered. Lucien tilted his head. Then why are you shaking? I hadn't even realized I was. My hands trembled at my sides, not from fear, but from something worse. Something I didn't want to name. His fingers ghosted over my cheek, and my breath hitched. You can lie to yourself, little hunter, he murmured, but you can't lie to me. I hated that he was right. And I hated even more that, deep down, a part of me didn't want to run away. Back inside, Finn and Lilia watched us return with knowing smirks. Well. Finn waggled his eyebrows. Did you finally kiss, or should we up the stakes? I grabbed a pillow from the couch and hurled it at his face. Lucien just chuckled. I was going to lose my mind. Or worse. My heart. Chapter 9. It hit me like a dagger to the chest. The memories that had been mere fragments, shattered glimpses of a life I couldn't quite grasp, finally pieced themselves together with a clarity that stole my breath. I had been lied to. Not just in this life, but in the one before. I remembered my father, not the man who raised me, but the one from my past life. A hunter. A leader. A man who had drilled into me the idea that vampires were soulless monsters. That Lucien was the worst of them all. That he was cruel, obsessive, and dangerous. But I also remembered something else. I remembered his fear. The way he had looked at me with barely concealed panic when I started doubting him. I had asked questions a good hunter was never supposed to ask. I had noticed the inconsistencies, the half-truths, the way Lucien had never once raised a hand against me unless it was in self-defense. I remembered realizing that the true monsters had been the ones who raised me. The hunters had used me. They had manipulated me into killing Lucien. And I had done it. I had betrayed him. And now history was trying to repeat itself. A cold shudder ran down my spine as I turned to face Lucien. His crimson eyes watched me with wary intensity, as if bracing himself for what I would say next. The weight of his past suffering, the suffering I had caused him, was unbearable. They lied to me, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. The hunters. My father. They lied to me in my past life. Lucien exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. I know. I swallowed hard, emotions clawing at my throat. And you never told me? He gave me a bitter smile. Would you have believed me? The realization hit like a punch to the gut. No, I wouldn't have. I would have fought him tooth and nail, convinced that he was the villain in my story. But he wasn't. He never had been. The door burst open. Finn, breathless and pale, leaned against the frame. So, we have a problem. Lucian's entire posture tensed. What kind of problem? Finn winced. The hunters are coming. My blood ran cold. How do they know I'm here? I asked, already dreading the answer. Finn hesitated, glancing at Lucian before answering. White moonlight ratted you out. Of course. Of course she did. That manipulative little. They know who you are now, Finn continued. They know you're the reincarnate of Alicia. And they want you dead. Silence thickened the air. Then Finn clapped his hands together. So, you have two choices. Stay human and die, or take his blood and live. I stared at him. That's not much of a choice. Lucian stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. Seraphine, I won't force you. But I can't lose you again. His desperation, raw and unguarded, made my chest ache. This wasn't just about survival. It was about him. About us. I took a shuddering breath. Okay. Lucian blinked. Okay. I nodded. Okay. Before I could second-guess myself, I tilted my head, exposing my neck. His gaze darkened with something primal, but he hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. His fangs sank into my skin, and the world tilted. I woke up burning. Not a pleasant warmth, but a scorching fever that made my veins feel like they were on fire. My body convulsed, sweat drenching the sheets. I barely registered the voices around me. Panicked, desperate. What's happening to her? Lucian's voice, sharp and laced with fear. The vampire doctors murmured amongst themselves, their faces tight with concern. We don't know. This isn't a normal transformation. Her body is rejecting the change. Lucian's growl sent chills through the room. Fix it. We're trying, but try harder. 2 days. 2 nights. I hovered between life and death, my fever so high that even the cold touch of vampires couldn't cool me. Lucian never left my side. I felt him, even in my delirium. The way he held my hand, murmured reassurances even when his voice cracked with doubt. And then, a breath. My own. My eyes fluttered open. Lilia was the first to notice. She's awake, she screamed, nearly knocking Finn over in her rush to my bedside. Lucian was there in an instant. His eyes, those deep, haunted crimson eyes, were wide, almost disbelieving. Seraphine, he breathed, his voice hoarse. I blinked. Why are you looking at me like that? For the first time, Lucian, the terrifying vampire lord, looked utterly fragile. Then, without warning, he crushed me against his chest. You scared me, he whispered against my hair. Never do that again. His arms tightened around me, as if letting go meant losing me forever. And maybe, for the first time, I realized just how much I meant to him. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting to mean just as much to myself. I woke up feeling different. No. I woke up feeling like a god. The moment my eyes snapped open, the world around me sharpened in ways I couldn't have imagined before. I could hear the wind rustling against the stone walls of the castle, the distant footsteps of guards pacing the halls, even the sound of Finn and Lilia arguing, probably about me, several rooms away. My body felt lighter, stronger, and when I sat up, it was almost like I had to hold myself back from moving too fast. And then the hunger hit me. A deep, gnawing thirst burned at the back of my throat, curling through my body like fire. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was overwhelming, like my entire existence suddenly revolved around the need to drink blood. Oh, hell. Panic shot through me as I clutched my throat. My body wanted something it had never craved before. I was a vampire now. A full-fledged, blood-drinking, immortal nightmare. Which meant I needed to feed. The thought made my stomach turn. I might have been a hunter once, but I wasn't a monster. I wasn't about to lunge at the first person I saw and rip into their throat like some bloodthirsty beast. A chuckle echoed from the doorway. "Well, you look absolutely feral, Lucian." I snapped my head toward him, and suddenly, I was across the room, grabbing his collar before I even realized I had moved. "What the hell did you do to me?" I growled. He smirked, completely unfazed by the fact that I had him pinned against the wall. "Saved your life. You're welcome, by the way." I narrowed my eyes. "I feel like I want to eat you." Lucian's smirk widened. "Darling, if you wanted to sink your teeth into me, you could have just asked." I shoved him away, rolling my eyes. "Ugh, you're insufferable." But my hunger still raged. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep control. "Relax," Lucian said, watching me carefully. "You won't be feeding on humans." I blinked. "What?" Lucian turned and picked up a goblet filled with dark red liquid from a nearby table. "We don't drink human blood, little hunter. That's an old misconception. We feed on animals." He handed me the goblet. "This is deer's blood." I stared at it, shocked. "You're joking." "I never joke about blood." I hesitated, but the burning in my throat was unbearable. Finally, I snatched the goblet from his hands and took a sip. The taste was strange. Rich, warm, metallic. It sent an instant wave of relief through my body, and before I could stop myself, I downed the whole thing. When I looked up, Lucian was watching me with amusement. "Thirsty, were we?" I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "Shut up." Lucian chuckled, shaking his head. "You're adjusting faster than I expected." My eyes darted toward my reflection in the nearby mirror. My skin was paler, my eyes brighter, almost glowing. My fangs peeked out slightly when I pressed my lips together. I barely recognized myself. I was a vampire. And I was still alive. The moment my parents arrived, I knew this was going to be awkward as hell. My mother, the noble vampire who had spent years pretending to be human, looked relieved. My father, not so much. He stood stiffly beside her, eyes scanning me with a mixture of worry and sadness. "Seraphine." My mother stepped forward, hesitating as if unsure whether to embrace me. "Mom." My voice was steadier than I expected. "I'm okay." Her eyes filled with tears, and before I could react, she pulled me into a tight hug. "I thought we lost you." I hugged her back, and for the first time since waking up, I felt a little more like myself. My father cleared his throat. "How do you feel?" I stepped back and gave him a small, wry smile. Like I could punch through a wall. My father sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Of course you do." Lucian, the ever-annoying, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "She's stronger now. She'll live." My father shot him a glare. "That doesn't make this any easier." Lucian's expression darkened. "It was the only way." Silence fell between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, my mother touched my face, her expression soft. "No matter what, you're still our daughter. That won't change." Something warm settled in my chest. I wasn't alone in this. With my newfound strength and speed, I was ready to face the hunters who had betrayed me. They thought they could manipulate me, lie to me, and get away with it? Not a chance. The battle was short and brutal. With Lucian, Finn, and Lilia at my side, we wiped out the threat before they could strike. The last hunter standing looked at me in horror. "You were one of us," he spat. I tilted my head, smiling just enough to show my fangs. "Correction. I was never one of you." Then I knocked him out cold. After the dust settled, I found Lucian leaning casually against the castle balcony, watching the moon. I strolled up beside him. "You're mine now, little hunter," he murmured. I groaned. "Ugh, I guess. But if you ever kidnap me again, you'll love me more," he smirked. I narrowed my eyes. I was gonna say stake you. Lucian chuckled, pulling me closer. I'd like to see you try. Finn and Lilia, watching from the doorway, snickered. They're literally perfect for each other, Lilia whispered. Finn nodded. Yeah, this is peak romance. I rolled my eyes but didn't pull away from Lucian's embrace. Maybe, just maybe, being immortal wouldn't be so bad. At least it would never be boring. Question for you. If you woke up as a vampire tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd do? A. Freak out and hide under a blanket. B. Test if you can turn into a bat. C. Dramatically whisper, I crave blood, just to mess with people. D. Find a hot vampire soulmate and start a supernatural romance smirking face fire. Drop your answers in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe.